Now, the modern world, which has shaped this Muslim forgetfulness of the principle of rahmah, and which it is one of the objectives, indeed the chief objective of Islamic education to reclaim, is all about a preoccupation with the world after the fall, this third fall, which I referred to. The third fall comes about through forgetting meaning, or through the growing suspicion that there is no meaning, that all that exists is what can be touched and what can be felt and experienced and enjoyed. Now, this process is something that we have to understand if we are to understand what the agenda for an Islamic education that can bring us back to the Adamic possibility might be in our present day, admittedly very difficult circumstances. One of the great failings I feel of us as Muslims in the West is that we don't really understand the West. We come here with some vague belief that yes, this is a materialistic civilization, but it allows us to practice our religion. And the Quran says, وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا, don't forget your portion of dunya, so why not get jobs here and further the education of our children and so on. But very rarely do we see any effort on the part of Muslims seriously to think about what this civilization is. And the result is, in many cases, the loss of Islamic identity within a generation or two, because we don't know what is the caustic mixture of this melting pot into which we have jumped, or at least into which we have happily thrown our children. It's a religious obligation that we must know where we are. Particularly for those of us in madhahib that generally do not accept the legitimacy of such a hijrah in the first place. The Maliki madhab, for instance, doesn't acknowledge it. You can't do it. You can't leave a land in which the adhan is heard everywhere for a land in which the adhan is tentatively heard inside mosques alone. It's haram. Maliki ulama in Spain, when the Christians captured it from the Muslims, said, al-hijra wajibah, you have to leave for the Dar al-Islam. The only complexity there, of course, is that where is the Dar al-Islam nowadays? That's what might render our presence here valid. But in any case, we are here now. In many cases, it was not our own decision. And we have to understand, as a matter of urgency, what are the guiding principles of the civilization which shapes the lives of those around us, and hence, whether we like it or not, inevitably shapes our own souls, because we are all, to a greater or lesser extent, Westernized. We can't escape our environment. It's the human temperament and nature to be affected by those with whom we have dealings, by the shape of the buildings in which we live, by the technologies which we use. Nothing is neutral. Everything is culturally and religiously significant and coded and breathes the ethos of a particular worldview and civilization. We need to understand what is that ethos, what is that civilization. Is it one that will enable us to create a project for Islamic education, and hence for Islam, by uncritically importing medieval Islamic paradigms and assuming that their application will still be relevant? Or do we need some kind of fertile synthesis? Are there ways in which we can even learn from at least the techniques of modernity in the fundamental Islamic ambition to regain our status as Khulafa of Adam and Hawa? Now, the quality of the modern world is, if you like, a preoccupation with signposts at its best. At its worst, it's nothing at all. Individuals wandering through life in a kind of contented, warm fog, perhaps occasionally having a glimmer of recollection of something higher, something more meaningful, but essentially wasted lives. Perhaps most lives are like that. But we can also say that because we don't believe in the fall, and particularly for the Maturidi Imams, we know that there is a natural knowledge and that human beings can intuit goodness and truth and the Creator without access to a formal kashfi revelation, that there is knowledge around us that is in some sense authentic knowledge. The Ash'aris would have problems with this, the Maturidis are much more comfortable with it. The Ash'aris, as no doubt you know, deny the possibility of natural knowledge and an intuitive knowledge of good and evil before wurud al-shara, before the advent of a revelation. The Maturidi Imams, and this is perhaps the biggest distinction between the two Sunni schools of theology, say that of course there is natural knowledge. If the Quraysh didn't have some intuition of what was good and what was evil, the khitab, the address of the Qur'an to them, could have had no meaning. That's a complex debate in Islamic epistemology, and I don't want to go into it. But what it does mean, I think, is that from the point of view of a Maturidi perspective, that we cannot dismiss out of hand the experience and the practices of any civilization. Because the fitrah is still there. It may be submerged, perverted, misunderstood, but it cannot be entirely erased because it is part of the human composite. You can't do away with it. You can't have a human being who is wholly ignorant and is wholly evil. Everybody has some inkling of the khilafah. Now,